Good morning. Welcome to the Center for American Progress. We're about to begin very shortly, so please take your seats. If everyone could please silence all cell phones or any other device that would make a noise during the event, that would be much appreciated. There'll be a Q&A session at the end of the event. Please keep your questions brief and introduce yourself to the audience and your affiliation. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here this morning and joining us for this really exciting event. My name is Ann Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of Generation Progress here at the Center for American Progress. And I want to start by thanking Senator Elizabeth Warren for joining us this morning, and the President of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten, and our amazing panelists who will join us in just a few minutes. So we're here today to launch a new campaign, Higher Ed, Not Debt. And the campaign's been over a year in the making. Dozens of organizations have come together to build this campaign really from the ground up. We believe that a quality higher education should be affordable and accessible to all without lifelong burden of debt or financial hardship. This campaign includes a broad cross-section of organizations, student groups, think tanks, policy experts, labor unions, community organizers, state, local, and national organizations, all coming together to organize and engage the public to find long-term solutions to fix our increasingly dysfunctional system of higher education. We all know the statistics. 40 million people in the United States now have student debt. 40 million people. Student debt now totals $1.2 trillion. It's more than credit card debt or auto loans, second only to mortgage debt in the United States. So who's impacted by this debt? It's not just the 18 to 22-year-olds who are currently in college. 60% of the existing $1.2 trillion is actually held by people over the age of 30. 15% of the debt is held by people over the age of 50. And the problem's only getting worse. Today, nearly 70% of college graduates have debt. The average amount that those graduates hold is nearly $30,000. And the situation is even worse for people who were not able to finish their degree and have a burden of debt. We're only just beginning to understand the long-term economic impacts of this debt on our economy and on our country as a whole. If you think about the housing market, what happens when young people and families have so much student debt that they can't actually qualify for a mortgage or buy a new car or even move out on their own or start a family? What happens to our generation's ability to start a business or save for retirement when we're held back by tens of thousands of dollars in student debt? How can we save money for retirement? What happens when people are paying off their student loans for 10 or even 20 years after graduating? When we talk about economic mobility and income inequality and access to the middle class, we also need to acknowledge the role that student debt is having in the lives of tens of millions of Americans. The Higher Ed Not Debt campaign is a way for us to do that, a way for us to come together and build a movement for change and create the public will to fix our system of higher education so that we can better serve the needs of students, their families, and our country. The campaign and our partner organizations are going to focus on 4 core areas of work. First, we must address the existing $1.2 trillion of debt, refinancing student loans, bankruptcy reform, expanding access to income-based repayment programs. All of these ideas could significantly help current borrowers. We also need to expand consumer protections for student loan borrowers. Second, we need to get to the root of the problem, skyrocketing college costs. The cost of a college degree has gone up 1,000% in the United States in the last 30 years. In fact, not so long ago, in many communities around the country, public colleges and universities were free. We need to start investing in our public colleges and university system and expand access to aid programs. We need to push schools to keep costs down and spend more on education and instruction and less on amenities and administration. Third, we need to address the role that privatization and profit is playing in our higher education system. For-profit colleges, private lenders, collection agencies, banks, textbook companies, the list goes on and on. Higher education has become a profit center for the 1%. We need to ask, who is this system actually working for? The students, our communities, our families, or the lenders who are literally going to make billions of dollars off of these loans? Finally, we need to engage public officials elected leaders, agencies, the federal government, and states to develop solutions to address the existing $1.2 trillion and keep us from getting to $2 trillion. We need a public dialogue, and we need public leaders to take up this fight. And that's why I am thrilled to be welcoming Senator Elizabeth Warren to the launch of the Higher Ed Not Debt campaign. Senator Warren has been a true champion for working people across the country, and she's been a leader on this issue of student debt and college affordability. So I actually began my career working for the late Senator Paul Wellstone from Minnesota. So I have to say it's really, truly an honor to introduce another great progressive champion from the U.S. Senate. So please join me in welcoming Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you. Thank you. It is good to be here this morning. I want to thank CAP for hosting us here. I want to thank Ann for the generous introduction. I want to thank Generation Progress and Demos and the American Federation of Teachers for coming together. But most of all, I just want to say, higher ed, not debt. Yes, I'm for that. Come on, everybody. That's what this is about. That's what this is about. You know, Ann talked about some of the numbers, but I want to talk about them again because I want to think about them the way families think about them. The facts are well known right now to every family in America, and that is the cost of college has gone through the roof. We got a lot of different ways to calculate it. I think a lot about what's happening at state schools. Once the backbone of America's higher ed system, the affordable option for every single kid. Today, a young person going to a state school, adjusted for inflation, will pay 300% of what her mom or dad would have paid less than 30 years ago. That's what's happened to higher ed in America. And what it means is that young people, in order to get an education, that basic ticket to America's middle class, they've got to take on debt. Debt, debt, and more debt. Today, what we've got is a situation where, just think about this part, over the last 10 years, the 25-year-olds who owe student loan debt. If you're 25 years old, how much student loan do you owe student loan debt? It's gone up 91% in just the last decade. That is, more and more people are taking on more and more debt. The number we keep remembering right now is $1.2 trillion. That's how much student loan debt is outstanding. But I want to remind you of something. When we started this fight last spring in the United States Senate, we were talking about $1.1 trillion in debt. When I was first talking about this, when I was running for the United States Senate, we were talking about student loan debt that was approaching $1 trillion. In other words, this thing is a monster that keeps getting bigger and bigger every single day. Today, when I woke up, students owe more student loan debt than they owed yesterday because the interest just keeps accumulating on that debt. And then, of course, it takes big swings up at the beginning of every single semester for our students. So we got a problem, and we got a problem that's getting bigger every day. The federal student loan program makes this problem worse. And that's where we need to focus. Undergrad student loans, I want you to think about this. Just the undergrad portion of federal student loans that were made between 2007 and 2012, just this limited time period, are now on target, according to the Congressional Budget Office, to produce $66 billion in profit for the federal government. Now, keep in mind, that is net of the people who can't pay their debts. That is net of the administrative costs. That is $66 billion in profits. And who does it come from? It comes from young people who are trying to get an education. It comes from young people who can't afford to write a check up front to be able to go to school. This is the wrong direction for our country to go. It is crushing our young people. It is dragging down our economy. It is a problem that all of us face, whether we personally owe the debt or not. So here's the conclusion I draw from this. If you're not rich in America, college costs more. It costs more because you have to borrow the money and pay and pay and pay. And not just pay the cost of the education, not just pay over time the cost to borrow, but pay to produce a profit for the United States government. Let's keep in mind what we're talking about here. These are not young people who went to the mall in order to say, gee, what else can I buy, and ran up debt and now want some help. These are young people who did everything we asked them to do. They worked hard, they played by the rules, they worked hard in school, they tried to get an education, and now the consequence is, as a matter of federal policy, we penalize those young people by saying you're going to pay more for your education than people who have the blessing of being born to a family that can pay for it up front. That is not how we create opportunity in this country. That is not how we narrow the income gap in this country. That is not how we produce a strong future for this country. We can do better, and we must do better. So let's talk just briefly. I want to throw out a couple of points we should be talking about on solutions. The first one, obviously, we need to bring down the cost of college. 3 out of 4 young people are in state schools today. That is still the backbone of higher education. But per student funding from 2007 to 2012 has declined 23%. So think about that. What that really means is the states just aren't putting money into the state schools. So where does the money come from? It comes out of the pockets of kids who try to go to those schools. So that's one of the things we need to focus on, how we get adequate resources into our state colleges and universities, into our community colleges. How do we get that money there? I want to just put 2 proposals on the table that we should talk about at more length. One is we should be thinking about leveraging federal dollars. Think about how we built the national highway system. We put in federal dollars, we asked the state to put in money, and we built a highway system that worked for the whole country, that permitted us to move goods all across the country. We need to do the same thing for higher education. We need to put in more federal resources. We need to ask the states to match those resources so that we can provide that education and bring down the costs for our young people, make the investment in their future. The second thing we should be talking about on bringing down the costs of college is the United States government today puts a total of about $170 billion, think about that, into financing higher education. They do it with Pell Grants, we do it with student loans, we do it with lots of different ways, and yet the United States government is not leveraging those dollars to get the universities, to get the colleges to lower the cost of tuition for the students. So something we need to focus on is how better to use federal dollars to make sure that the students are getting a lower cost education, to make sure that schools have aligned their incentives, as the economists like to say, have aligned their incentives so that they have an interest in keeping tuition dollars low. And I want to put the other part in this, in making sure that people at 2-year institutions make it through in 2 years, people at 4-year institutions make it through in 4 years. That helps keep the costs down. So this is what I think of as skin in the game. What we're talking about, I have a bill right now with Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island and Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, and part of what we propose in this bill is that federal student loan money be made available as it is today, but there be some basic criteria in place, like what the schools are doing with tuition costs for students and whether students can make it through on time and what the default rates look like on the other side once a student leaves. And if schools don't meet certain targets on those, then those schools have to give back to the United States government a portion of that loan money. That money can then be redistributed to the schools that really are making an effort on behalf of their students. We need to use our federal leverage in a way that benefits students, not just in a way that benefits certain schools that are not working hard to make sure their students get a good education. So Those are some of the things we will do, and in the coming weeks, you'll continue to see more legislation on this. Like I said, Jack Reed and Dick Durbin and I are continuing to work on this. But there is a third thing that we can do, and that is we need to attack directly how much students spend on their student loans. We need to refinance $1.2 trillion in outstanding student loan debt. We just need to do that. Think about it this way. Everyone refinances when interest rates go down, right? That's part of what we do. People refinance their homes. Businesses are out there. They've already done it. Refinance their debt down to the current low student loan rates, down to the current low interest rates, but not students with federal loans. Students with federal loans, we have students that are locked in now to interest rates that are nearly 7%. For those who have older loans, we've got them. I see some faces out here who are saying higher, 8%, 9%. Students who are locked in at higher interest rates, we need to bring those interest rates down. That gives students an opportunity to have a little more money to be able to make their payments and in some cases to be able to pay their loans off earlier. So again, in the next few weeks, I will be working with my colleagues now. We will be introducing a bill to bring down student loan interest rates to permit current students to refinance their student loan debt. So let me tell you just a little bit about that, since that's the bill that's still coming up. The idea is pretty simple. It's about letting students take advantage of the current low interest rates. Last year, Congress agreed that student loan interest rates were much too high, so they lowered them significantly for this year's borrowers. And they brought them down to 3.86%, but that effort did nothing for people holding the $1.2 trillion in outstanding student loan debts. So what we will propose is bringing the current interest rates down, permitting students to refinance, down to 3.8%. 3.86% for undergraduate loans. Now, the savings would vary, of course, depending on how much debt someone has and what the interest rate looked like. But for a recent graduate who had borrowed the maximum just on undergraduate loans, the payments would drop by as much as $1,000 a year, and total interest paid over the life of the loan would be cut nearly in half. For those who have older loans, for those with graduate school loans, and for those with loans from private lenders, the savings would be substantially higher. This is real money. This is real money back in the pockets of students who invested in their education. This is real money that will help young people find a little more financial stability as they work hard to build their futures. This is real money that says America invests in those who get an education. How are we going to pay for it? Because this is always the big question. The answer is we can close tax loopholes to pay for it, and I have a place we should begin. We should begin with the Buffett rule. And I propose that we do this dollar for dollar. We pass the Buffett rule, and for every dollar it brings in, we use that dollar to refinance student loan debt. If it brings in more than the anticipated $75 to $100 billion, then the answer is we lower those interest rates even more. This is a dollar for dollar mapping. I think about it this way because I think about the choice that America makes. Think about this. Right now, in order to finance the United States government, we take in billions of dollars of profits off student loans, but permit billionaires to have enough loopholes that they pay at tax rates that can be lower than those of their secretaries. So this is a straightforward choice. We can take $75 billion and either say we'll use it to protect tax loopholes for billionaires, or $75 billion can be used to help students refinance their outstanding student loan debt. It's billionaires or students. Where do we want to make the investment? Do we want to make the investment in those who've already made it big, or do we want to make the investment in every young person who's out there trying to get an education so they'll have an opportunity to build a real future. That's what this choice is about. And the reason I talk about it this way is, sure, it's about math, it's about economics, it's about getting our economy started again and building a stronger economy, but it's about our values. Where, as a country, do we believe we should make our investments? Follow the money on this. Invest in billionaires or invest in students? Well, I want to put my money on students. For me, that's what this is all about. So I just want to say one more thing about this. When I grew up, I didn't know if I'd ever have a chance to go to college. My dad had a lot of different jobs. He ended up as a maintenance man. My mom worked the telephones at Sears. I got a scholarship first to go to college, gave it up to get married. Some of you may know that story. But my chance to go to college was a commuter college that cost $50 a semester, right? I ended up going to, yeah, I know, you gasp on that. But here's what I want you to think about. How could you go to college on $50 a semester? I went to college for a college that charged $50 a semester because I grew up in an America that was investing in kids who were trying to get an education. I grew up in an America that said, in effect, if you want to get out there and try, we'll make it available to you. I ended up going to law school, to a law school that charged a few $100s a semester, again, a public school. Why did they charge only a few $100s a semester? Again, because for anyone who would work hard, who could meet the entrance requirements, then it was available to you. You could make that work. It was an America that invested in opportunity, and it was an America that created opportunity. I believe in that America. I believe we are losing that America, and this is the place where we stop and make our stand. We say we understand that this is about our values. We understand that this is a measure of what kind of country we are. And this is where we make the decision. We as a country, we as a people are going to make the investments in our young people. We are going to help create the opportunities so that they can build a stronger future for themselves, for their children, and for their grandchildren. For me, that's what this is all about. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for being here today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I really do feel strongly about this one. I do. I think about this speech, and I came in here and I sort of started at 90 decibels and stayed at 90 decibels. But it's because I feel so strongly about this. And I am therefore so glad that this is happening and so glad to have a chance to introduce the next speaker. I'm going to introduce the president of the American Federation of Teachers. And I just want to say one key thing about Randi Weingarten. She is committed to two things over and over. The first is greater opportunity for all of our students. And the second is a stronger investment in our public education system. We have a tough fight in front of us. There are plenty of forces aligned to keep all of the money flowing exactly the way it flows, indeed to flow more money in that direction. We have a tough fight, but there is no one I would rather stand with in this fight than Randi Weingarten. Randi, it's up to you. Go do it. Go do it. It's all yours.
Okay, it's not a really cool thing to follow Senator Elizabeth Warren. Isn't it great to have Senator Warren in the Senate? So, you know, I do want to thank, I know she had to rush out to go to a hearing, but I want to thank the senator for not only being the great leader that she is, not only beating the drum on this issue, but being one of the few people who can connect the dots and do it in plain English so that people actually understand what is at stake in the student debt battle. So when I think about today, when I thought about today, and some of the people I was with that day in Sallie Mae will be on this panel, but I thought about a sweltering day last summer when I joined hundreds of students, educators, and parents outside of a Sallie Mae shareholder meeting in Delaware, right? Because where else would shareholder meetings take place? We were, those of us who were there, we were asking Sallie Mae during their shareholder meeting for a conversation about the impact of what they were doing, and particularly the impact of what they were doing as it affected students in terms of the crippling student debt. And what we were met with was not open arms. What we were met with was dozens of police officers, some on horseback, others in riot gear, and if we didn't keep to our lane at all times and do exactly what they said, we were threatened many times with arrest. Think about the optics of that situation. The students of America going to the financier and saying, stop, you're actually hurting our futures, and met instead with horses on horseback threatening arrest. In some ways, that is what this campaign is about and why it is needed. Because if we don't actually help reclaim the promise of higher education, how do our kids have a future in this country? We can't be a nation any longer that tells our young people college is really, 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 really important, while at the same time saddling them with crushing debt and slashing the investments in the higher ed programs that we've said were really, really, really important. You can't reclaim the promise of America if kids don't have a ticket to the middle class. And you can't get that ticket to the middle class if it is saddled with a debt that is growing and growing and growing. We've done things differently in this country. Sorry that I sound so angry. Many of you in this room may not have been alive, but in the last century, you know, the 20th century, early in the 20th century, our nation decided that high school was really important. High school was really important. We told our young people that that was the path to success in industrial America. And what happened? It became a public good. It became financed by the public fisc. High school is part of public education everywhere in this country. And even in the 1960s, as Senator Warren just said about herself, and I even saw it in the 1970s when I went to a land grant part of Cornell University. We could pay our tuition bill at state colleges with money earned in a summer job, with a few years of a first job, because of the investments that were made by the state and federal governments. A summer job won't even dent the cost of the materials one needs in college today. So, in the 21st century, we must make higher education a public good. Higher education has to be about expanding opportunity for the next generation, not a way for Wall Street and for-profit colleges to enrich themselves. Now, Ann, Senator Warren have all talked about a lot of the facts already. $1 trillion in student debt and growing, more than auto and credit card debt combined in America. We'll have students graduating with an average of $26,000 in student debt in an economy that is still not fully recovered, with a job market that is still really wanting. How do people do that? What will kids do? What are the choices that we are saying to kids by doing that? So our young people face a stark choice. Take on crushing student loan debt, forego college education, or give up their dreams. That is simply unacceptable and unsustainable in the United States of America. And the high debt burden and the poor job prospects are also an ongoing economic disaster. A couple more facts. More than 43% of federal loan borrowers are in deferment right now. More than 12% of federal loan borrowers are over 90 days delinquent in their payments. More and more graduates are reporting deferring life decisions, such as starting a family or buying a new home or even buying a car, which they may need for commutation to a job. These conditions are denying college graduates the promise of entering the middle class. But as Ann said before, it's not just recent graduates. The debt has a lasting drag on borrowers and our economy. 60% of borrowers are still paying back their loans, or 60% of the borrowers that are still paying back their loans are 30 years old or higher. Almost 20% are over 50. And I don't know about the people who are here today, but I remember we had tickets at that time. Sending in the last ticket of my student loan and feeling an incredible relief. If you are in your mid-50s and you are still spending money on a student loan, or if you never can get that student loan off your back, what does that say about the dream of a future? So, the loan debt is crushing. There's been a huge reduction of funding into our colleges. And at the same time, people who work in our colleges are totally and completely exploited. More than 70% of the professors who teach students in colleges these days are adjuncts, inadequately compensated, exploited all the time, no benefits. We are creating a race to the bottom in higher education. And the disinvestment inevitably decreases the amount of need-based aid available for the neediest students. It drives tuition costs up. It drives student debt up. But what we're seeing in colleges throughout America is that there's not any additional supports or any additional quality. Disinvestment by state and federal government, or the states and the federal government, decreases the amount of resources necessary to help students gain access to, persist in, or complete their college education. And what a surprise. Look at the completion rates of college education. So this is a terrible cycle, a catch-22 cycle, which we need to make into a virtuous cycle. We need to change this situation where student debt is up, investment is down, and those who try to educate our young people are being exploited. That all needs to change. And at the same time, we need to examine what Wall Street and the for-profit colleges are doing right now. What are the practices that they're using? Are they predatory or not? Are they skimming off interests? Are they locking colleges and universities in risky bank deals? And so the American Federation of Teachers in the coming months will put out a report on all of this. We're looking at all of this. We're asking those questions. So let me end by saying, and people are like, why is she so into this? Well, it's not simply that we are the largest higher education union in the United States of America. So we see this every day with kids who come into our colleges where adjuncts and full-time and tenured and non-tenured faculty are trying to help kids unlock their dreams and achieve them. But we also see this in terms of the hypocrisy of the United States of America, where we say college is really important, but we don't provide the wherewithal for kids to actually get on that steps of the ladder of opportunity to do that. That is why we are so into this. And we will do everything we can to support this campaign, to help provide relief to students who are saddled with debt, to help fight for college to be affordable and accessible to all, to help fight to restore the investment and increase the investment in colleges, universities, and community colleges, to fight to end what we believe are the predatory practices of Wall Street and the predatory practices of for-profit universities. But we can't do it alone. And that's why I am so excited that there will be momentarily this panel of students and progressives, because together, we can make higher education a public good and ensure that when we say we want to help kids and students have a ticket to the middle class, we provide that ladder with rung upon rung upon rung of opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Randy and Senator Warren, for those awesome and inspiring speeches. As our panel is joining us, I just wanted to let folks know that throughout the day today, there will be Twitter town halls on the hour, every hour, starting at 11 and going till 6 p.m. And we've got some awesome folks who are leading those Twitter town halls. Stephen Lerner, who's here, who's been a huge part of this campaign from the beginning, is leading one. Different organizations are taking different hours, and Senator Gillibrand will also be leading a Twitter town hall later today. So tune in online on Twitter. Our panel is just getting their seats, but I wanted to take one quick second to introduce them. These folks have been a huge part of the campaign and our development and strategies, and also in the work that's happening around the country on the ground. So Tamara Drought is the Vice President of Policy and Research at Demos. Nalini Stamp is from Working Families, and she is the Director of Strategic Partnership and Youth Engagement. Max Espinoza is a Senior Vice President of Education Programs and Policy at Scholarship America. And Jennifer Wang is the Policy and Advocacy Manager of Young Invincibles. And our panel is going to be moderated today by Sarah Adello, who's the Policy Director here at Generation Progress. So Sarah, take it away.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you everyone for joining us today for this incredible event. It's been a long time in the planning, so thank you again for all being here and joining us. So to start off, I know we've talked a little bit about this before with the speakers, but as was highlighted, students are graduating almost $30,000 in debt. How did we get here? So I'm Jen or Tamara?
Yeah, I think both Elizabeth Warren and Randy from AFT hit the nail right on the head. You know, the problem of state disinvestment is a huge driver of tuition at public colleges and universities. And I just have a few statistics. I don't want to bore the crowd because I know their statistics, but I want to reiterate that nearly 3/4 of all students who attend college or university go to a public institution. And what's happened at public institutions is that tuition in just the last couple of years, so since 2007, has gone up $1,850 or 27%. So if you can imagine in just those recent years, already a 27% jump in tuition, that's huge. And to go along with that, states cut $2,353 per student in funding, or 23% in that same amount of time since 2007. So you can imagine, you know, that the burden of going to college and paying for college, you know, used to be a little bit more on the states. It's now a lot more on students and families, and I think that that's a big part of the problem.
Can I just add to that? That is really sort of the crux of the issue for most students. The reality is, in case not everybody in here is a higher ed expert, traditionally, state universities and colleges get the lion's share of their budget support through states. So what has happened over time is that has shifted. So we've taken what used to be a public good, as both Senator Warren and Randy described it, and really slowly over the last generation privatized it, commoditized it by creating all kinds of ways for big banks to make money through the entire pipeline of higher ed. The reality is you'll hear a lot of people say, but states are spending so much more than they used to on higher ed. Absolutely true in absolute terms. What else has happened, though, is that the number of students that are enrolled in these institutions has grown by, tenfold. So the reality is, the thing that really matters here is how much money are we spending per student? And when you look at it that way, we're actually spending about 26% less today than we did in 1980. So what happens? What's the connection to the debt? When colleges and universities lose that appropriation from the state, they have to make it up. They cut their costs, they have bigger classrooms, they go to adjuncts. Students, to meet the higher sticker price of tuition, take out loans. And the reality is today, the majority of money coming from, not the majority of money, today, nearly half of all states, colleges and universities are bringing in more money from student support than they are from state support. We've completely shifted the responsibility of paying for the major rung of opportunity in this country onto students and their parents. We've individualized this responsibility, and getting back and getting rid of the debt for diploma system will really mean challenging that really radical shift that has happened.
Thank you. This is a personal issue for so many of us. I have student debt. Can I ask how many people in the audience here have student debt? Ooh, that would be over half for people who are watching online. But there are some great things that are happening, especially in communities. Max, can you tell us about what some of the folks that you work with at Scholarship America are doing?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sarah. And it's such an honor to be on this panel with this distinguished group of individuals and to follow Senator Warren. Scholarship America and one of our flagship programs, Dollars for Scholars, actually started in Massachusetts with this idea that if members of the community, individuals, came together, they could actually, help students in their communities go to college by everyone putting in $1, for example. This is over 50 years ago, and obviously there's been a big change in the landscape. But that idea that the community can actually play an impact, have a role and play a great impact and make a difference is still true. In my role at Scholarship America, I've had the amazing opportunity to travel the country and meet some of these individuals, some extraordinary individuals who I would consider the average Americans, all walks of life, from the hog farmer in Minnesota. Believe it or not, I have met the hog farmer in Minnesota who really cares deeply about helping students go to college in their community, to the teacher, in Washington State, to the small business owner in Connecticut, folks that actually are coming at this from all walks of life and all political ideologies. And so one of the things I wanted to point out that I've seen as I'm traveling is this is not a partisan issue. This is not a left or right issue. This is really an American issue. It's an issue of the future of our country, and I think the previous speakers really touched on that. The one question that I continuously get as I travel the country is, what are you going to do about the rising costs? What are you going to do about the rising costs? Because we have this, folks that are actually using their sweat equity to help kids in their community go to college and continuously seeing that eroded over time. And so, it's disheartening, to know that the money that's being raised is going into a system that's just eating it up, and then students are still coming out with, in some cases, worse off than they could have. And the statistics are daunting. You've heard all of them. I'm from California, and there was a time when free education was in sight, and we've gone so far from that, and I think our folks really, they believe, the community folks that we work with believe in hard work. From the folks in North Dakota, who are working really hard to just make a living. They believe in, if you work hard, you should get the opportunity to have a better life. And so getting back to that somehow is critical.
Thank you. And because it's the community members, but also you're working with corporations too, right? So this is, everybody's trying to put in to help with these really rising costs, whether it's in the state, for the state schools or other institutions.
That's right, yeah, and if I could just say a little bit about the corporations. We work with over 800 corporations across the country. So there are some actors out there that are really trying to do right by students. We have some really good examples. Our corporate clients give out over 160 million in private scholarships just last year alone to over 65,000 students. And these are small corporations to larger corporations. And one example is the Buick Achievers Scholarship Program that is sponsored by General Motors Foundation and administered by Scholarship America. And this program essentially provides $4.5 million for over 100 awards that are renewable up to $25,000 each year to helping students meet their financial need. They've given out through our partnership over $16.5 million, and this is to promote students getting into the automotive industry who are interested in working in that industry. And so that's just an example of one of our many corporate clients that gets that the investment in the future workforce is critical, and they're putting in their own skin in the game to actually help students go into those fields.
As you mentioned earlier, they can't do it by themselves. Community members can't do it by themselves. Their sweat equity is not going far enough. So what are some of the solutions here? What can be done? I know that the senator talked about refinancing for a little bit. What are some other things? And then I'm really excited to hear more from Nalini about what students are doing and what young people are doing to really make these solutions a reality. So what can be done? Help.
Well, I think the way we think about it at Demos is there's two challenges, both feed into each other. One is we have to deal with the existing $1.2 trillion. So refinancing, bankruptcy reform. I would argue that we should not only reform bankruptcy to end the exception given to private student loans, but to also make federal student loans truly practically dischargeable. They're very hard to discharge right now. And then we have to deal with slowing down this very fast ramp leading to $2 trillion. And that's where it gets a lot tougher. Politically, they're not impossible because what we're talking about here is new revenue. And the senator laid out a great way to pay for the refinancing. I think there's a lot of energy and interest in a federal-state partnership and using federal dollars to get states to do the right thing. There's no reason we can't have a federal commitment that says states, if you commit to getting your state system to be primarily debt-free, particularly for working class and middle class students by a certain date, we'll match every dollar you put in with another buck or something like that. So I think, but it's going to take a real bold commitment to really getting back. And one aside, it wasn't that long ago that the system was debt-free. We're not talking about having to go back to the 50s. We really only have to go back to about 1991, 92, 93 for a time when debt was still the exception and not the rule. It's really quite an incredible shift in a pretty short period of time that we're dealing with here. So I'm hopeful, and I think higher ed, not debt, and the coming together of all of these organizations and student leaders is exactly what needs to happen, because this will not be an easy fight.
And it's not impossible. I
Right.
mean, you have the governor of Tennessee
Exactly.
said a couple weeks ago in his State of the State that he would like free community college. People are having these conversations in the state and local level and saying we need to think about this. So I think that it takes the state and local power, but it also takes coming here and talking to our legislators, senators, and Congress folks to put pressure and to say that we want answers. It's interesting because policies are there can be so many policies, refinancing, bankruptcy, restoring bankruptcy protections, restoring the statute of limitations, but we need power. And as we've heard over and over again, 40 million borrowers, right? That is such a big potential to organize and to come together, and we need to come out with our stories. So many people, including myself, I was ashamed for so long that I wasn't able to attend college because I couldn't afford it. And I was a first-generation college student, Nobody in my family knew how to apply for financial aid, Pell Grant. All of these things were like a different a different world for us. And I think that coming out with those stories, it was empowering for myself to come out with a story and to be vocal about it. And I think it's really empowering to say, yes, this is how much debt I have. And it's from this university and this state. And this is how we can build power. And I see it in, actually yesterday, or the other day in Ohio State Student Association had a press conference at their capital with the Ohio Education Association and their whole state table that they're creating to attack higher ed, not debt. And it was really wonderful because you had teachers, adjuncts, professors, students, all coming out saying their stories. And you also had high school students, because it's about their futures, right? These high school students are going into these programs and saying, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. And if you see the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world who went to college for a little bit, or you see the folks who are making a lot of money in Silicon Valley, what are your choices there, right? What do you think that you're going to do? So I think it really takes strength in numbers to attack this issue, and across the board, not just students and young people, young professionals who are paying off debt, parents and grandparents who are getting their Social Security garnished because they've helped their grandchildren get a co-sign loans. So I think we need a lot of power to be built, and it's really wonderful. And I also will give a quick shout out to New York Students Rising, who are going to the Albany Capitol today to have a press conference and to say that they need solutions in New York.
Exactly. I mean, I love the point that you raised right now that, yes, there are a lot of young people getting involved on this, from the high school students who want to go to college and are afraid of the costs of college and what that's going to mean afterwards, to even, are they going to make it all the way through as they're trying to, as they're getting saddled with more debt throughout their education, but to the parents and the grandparents, and that we do need, the grandmas as well, calling up the legislators saying, hey, I'm still paying off my debt, especially as more people are going back to college, as this economy is demanding that we have a more educated workforce. What else? I know, Jen, that some of the young people you work with in California have been doing some really exciting things as well.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Nalini and the rest of the panelists, absolutely. I think that there is absolutely a movement building that includes not just people with existing debt, but also that includes students and families who are actually on the ground, who are seeing their states invest less per student and seeing, themselves, their families, their neighbors, other people around them pay a lot more for college. And so Young Invincibles, noticed the problem. We wanted to create a campaign that would really get at this problem of state disinvestment per student for higher education. And so on the ground in 7 states, we are, really trying to give communities the tools that they need to talk about the budget process and to talk about what's been changing in their state. Everything from, how much the family shares, so how much families are paying for tuition in their state, how much that's changed in the last 10 years. And I can tell you right now, there are only 2 states that have not disinvested per student. And, we're also, giving them the tools they need to talk to their state legislators in a powerful and an impactful way. So I agree with Nalini, we absolutely have to build power, but there is a really a robust movement, I would have to say, on the ground right now. And our Student Impact Project really tries to, provide tools and information that a lot of people, I would say, didn't really understand or know. I think a lot of people see tuition rising as, a problem in a silo, but it's really because of all of these other things that are going on.
And I think with the tuition rising, to what you're saying, of people being ashamed of sharing their stories of debt and letting people know, I have debt too, and this is something that needs to be solved, because as was mentioned earlier, this has a ripple effect, right? It's not just the right now in this moment when I'm with debt, but that $400 a month I'm paying into debt might mean I can't afford a mortgage and to buy a home or to get a car or to save for my own kids' college when they're trying to go. So I know some of you have been doing work with legislators and putting pressure on electeds. How have they been responding?
I mean, there was actually in a number of states, legislators have been putting forth policies that are really innovative. A legislator in New York put out a bill for free CUNY and SUNY. If you do community service hours, we'll see where it goes. But legislators I feel like are feeling the pressure, and students are starting to lobby. They're going to, I've seen it in Oregon and New Jersey. I've seen students actually go to their capitals and say, I want to talk to you about my student loan debt. So legislators are actually caving in to try to find innovative solutions, but also trying to, doing stuff like not increasing tuition last year, like the Oregon Student Association won in Oregon. So I think that's really important.
And I know that in Wisconsin, they've got a really interesting state refinancing bill. Of course, here in DC, there's many pieces of legislation, like from borrow bill rights to other refinancing options that are out there. So it's really been exciting to see legislators respond, but we obviously need many more. And we need solutions that are going to be moving forward too. So I think what I'd like to do right now is actually open it up to the audience to see if you all have any questions, because this is an incredible panel and want to make sure that you all have the chance as well. So I think in the back, I see a hand raised. And if you could also say where you're from, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Mark Sobolski. I have an LLC called Great Teaching. The young lady said that there are only 2 states that have not disinvested per student. Which states are they?
Let me see here. North Dakota and Wyoming is spending, every state except North Dakota and Wyoming
Kind of
is
a
spending less per student on
Kind
higher
of a consistency
education.
there about getting into new oil money, but we won't get into that right
Yeah.
now. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Precisely.
We have another question. Let's do the striped shirt and then the person in front of them.
Hello, I'm from California, and my name is Deshani. I had a question about the Scholarship America. What about students in like low-income communities that are sometimes the sole provider for their family? How about how does it work for scholarships for students who are the sole provider and sometimes might not have that information for scholarships, and then they're having to go to college, balance full-time work, and also be the sole provider, and coming out of college, you're in debt. So how would you see yourself speaking to legislators about these kinds of issues as well?
A really great question. One of the things we're doing as an organization is we're actually finally establishing a presence here in Washington. And I think that speaks in and of itself to a recognition on behalf of the organization, Scholarship America, and our community groups that I was talking about earlier, of the need to become engaged in this conversation. That's why we're so excited to be part of this coalition with this group and others. And so, we have chapters that are like in New Orleans, the Jefferson Parish chapter, that's working in low-income communities, working with the school districts, and doing everything they can to help kids like the ones you're talking about in that community put together the money, the financing to go to college. But we recognize now with our community members that that's not enough. That's just a piece of the equation, and we have to be part of the larger conversation, the one that's taking place today, as well as the bigger conversation around post-secondary financing, in order to ensure that the students that you're talking about get the full support that they deserve. Because our community chapters can only do so much. I mean, what they're doing is extraordinary, right? And they're doing it volunteer, by the way. That's the other piece. I don't know if I was really clear about that, but that, I think, is one of the great stories, American stories, that's embedded in the work that we're doing. But it's not enough, unfortunately, because of what's happening with affordability, costs, and the student debt crisis.
I think what you're also pointing out too is that, as whether we're recognizing that, yes, there are young families in this country, which means that there are people who are younger and have children and also want to go to school, to even those who are older with families and wanting to go to school, that student debt doesn't exist in a silo. It's also about making sure that people have access to childcare, for example, so that they can go to school and get their education, and make sure their children are also taken care of. So we also have to acknowledge that, the face of the college student isn't necessarily the 18-year-old who just graduated from high school and is going to live on campus for 4 years and doesn't have kids or anything, but that it's increasingly older people with children, and with that reality, we need to make sure there's support for those students as well, right?
Sir, if I could just add something too that I should have mentioned. We have this notion, and I'm wearing my old policy hat from California, that it's just about the actual cost of tuition. And I think getting to Sarah's point, it's so much more than that. Like the cost of tuition is just one piece, but there's so many other costs. And people assume that because, community college fees are quote unquote low in some places, that somehow that takes care of the cost of education. And we know that's just not true. And so part of what we need to do is bring additional data and information, real stories of students like the ones that are being talked about to light, so that policymakers can actually get that it's just not a statistic that you're getting in front of you that's saying that, oh, as long as you cover the cost of tuition, you're good. That's already hard enough to cover, but we have researchers like Sarah Goldberg-Rapp in Wisconsin who's doing a lot of work around this issue to highlight that it's not just the cost of tuition. There's more to paying for college than that.
I would have to agree. I think that there is a lot of misinformation out there about your debt, and a lot of young people, we know, don't exhaust their federal options before they turn to private student loan debt, and that can have lasting consequences on a young person's life and their financial security. So everything from making sure that young people have the information that they need to choose an education that's right for them and to choose to take out loans that are right for them, to making sure that, like you said, there are protections on the back end when they're actually repaying their loans, and making sure that repayment is simple and that everyone knows how to do it. I mean, I think that there's just a ton of information that needs to get out there in a good format, in the right format for everyone to make sure that they're making good decisions.
Hi, my name is Melissa Byrne, and I'm starting an organization here in DC organizing people with debt to have our own voice. And I have 60 grand that's defaulted and 30 grand that with cosigners that I'm paying back. And one thing I haven't heard here is a bigger vision about how we can imagine just shutting down Sallie Mae, and that these corporations shouldn't be able to see people wanting to go to college as being people that they're going to profit from. So how do we move from talking about tweaks, which I would love to be able to have my private loan debt refinanced through Treasury, just so that way Sallie Mae doesn't profit from me, but really getting to a broader vision. So that way we don't say that, hey, people that want to go to college are just there to have a bunch of basically white guys make a lot of money off me and other people that just want to do a lot better with their lives. So really just getting to that more fundamental structure. I have a feeling maybe Nalini wants to talk, or anybody else, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think that there are a lot of different ways. One, I don't know if folks know this, but after the Sallie Mae shareholder meeting that Randy was talking about, Sallie Mae split themselves conveniently into two different companies. One, because they have federal contracts, right, with the federal government, and then two, they have their private student loan services. So that was a sneaky little way to turn the tables. But I think that there's multiple ways that it is actually happening. Has anybody heard of Hire One? Hire One? Okay, a couple of hands. They're campus debit cards. When you it was crazy when I was organizing in Florida A&M University, the biggest HBCU in the country. You have a Wells Fargo logo on your ID card. You have a bank logo on your actual ID card, and it's conveniently fits in an ATM. And that's where your student loans are. That's where your financial aid comes from. And they charge for every time that you use an ATM. They charge for, and there's lots of legislation. In Oregon, there was just this legislation to get rid of the service fees, to get rid of the charges. And that's, I think, some of the ways. Again, they are little tweaks. But I think that we do need to think long term, and we need to think big about cutting contracts with Sallie Mae and Wells Fargo and these private student loans for our federal government. And we need to think about those things. So I think that's one way, cutting contracts and putting pressure on the Department of Education to do that. And I think another way is legislatively on the state and local level to cut contracts with actual schools and universities with these profiteers off of student loan debt.
Well, and I think that's one of the great things about the campaign is that there are these four issue areas that bring us together, but people are doing a lot of different work to address the issues of student debt. And so you have people who are doing a lot of what like Nalini was talking about, they're protesting outside of Sallie Mae and the shareholders meetings. And then you like have some of us, I'll like put myself in that category, nerdy DC, like policy wonky people who are working on like the smaller steps in the meantime, right? And so that's what I think is really exciting about this campaign is you have a whole spectrum of people that are trying to tackle this issue from the big vision to the smaller steps along the way.
Can I make one point? Because I think you bring up a really profound trend that has happened, not just in higher ed, but in all American lives, which is the reality is when the public starts shifting to the private, you can always count on the financial industry to fill that gap. It happened with credit card debt as we chipped away at the public safety net, as the minimum wage eroded. What made the difference for low-income families? How did they make ends meet? Credit cards. And you see it in the student loan system as well. As we began chipping away at state investment, who rises to the occasion and provides the money that students need to pay for what is really a public good? The banks. So whenever we sort of lose sight of the ball, what's the phrase? Drop our eyes from the ball? I should stop trying to use phrases. I'm horrible at them. You can count on the financial services industry immediately, quickly providing much needed financial resources to often very desperate people who are trying to get ahead or keep the lights on in their apartment. And that won't stop, really. The big solution is until we completely zap the demand for loans. Because now we've got this bureaucracy. I mean, this is a beast. We've got debt collectors, servicers, originators, a whole industry built up to service, maintain, track the student loan debt beast. And that is a complete outcome of radical, radical changes in public policy.
Hi, Sarah Ann Lewis from the AFL-CIO. You've probably all retweeted me in the past hour or so. I would love to hear you talk about what the coalition is doing to address sort of the big elephant in the room that we've talked around the edges of. And these are the issues of socioeconomic class and race that are heavily implicated in this. And Nalini, I want to thank you for sharing your story. It's very similar to mine, who, I went to law school on scholarship. I went to undergrad on scholarship. But I still carry $180,000 in student loan debt. As a first-generation student from a working-class family, it was a struggle to work 2 part-time jobs and then make it to class and still manage to graduate at the top of my class all through school. I'm a little proud of myself. But so often in DC and in platforms like the Wall Street Journal or groups like Cato, this is a blame the victim narrative, and it often focuses on whiny upper middle class kids, but we know that the majority of debt is actually held by lower middle class and working class families, and that the problem goes beyond the debt and into access. So I would love to hear you all talk about what the campaign is doing and focusing on these problems, and encourage people to tune into the Twitter town hall at 4 o'clock when the AFL will be addressing these.
So I think that that's a very poignant question, and it's definitely something that I think we all are working on in our own way. I think one thing that I think we all should just point out is that aid and student aid and grant aid can be better targeted. Like, we know that, Pell Grants are essential to low-income students and families and their ability to have access to affordable education and to graduate successfully. And we know that Pell Grant aid has covered far less of the cost of going to college than it has. And we, in addition to grant aid, we need to make sure that loans are well targeted. We need to make sure that families know their options, and that the government is investing, and that it's investing in low-income students first through Pell and through grant aid that they don't have to pay back, right? Like, I think that that's one way that we can talk about the cost of education and talk about students and families in an impactful way. It's making sure that these are funds that they're not paying back at the end of the day so that they can decrease the amount of student debt that they have. I think that's an important investment that we need to protect.
Supporting and also watching the in-state tuition equity fights. Undocumented students who sometimes cannot get or don't get federal loans or programs or financial aid, and then they have to pay out-of-state tuition, have to take a lot of credit card debt. There's a lot of debt besides the $1.2 trillion. Like it's bigger than that lump sum. And so supporting those in-state battles and fights, I think, is something that the campaign has been looking out for and paying attention to. Also, I think, something that Working Families has done in New York, the governor said that he would like to, so Pell Grants were not I remember it was 5 to 10 years ago, Pell Grants were taken away from incarcerated folks. People were while they were incarcerated, going to school, and the majority of people who are incarcerated are young Black and brown men, but being able to go to school so they wouldn't end up back there again. And what happened was they took Pell Grants away from those inmates. And so the governor in New York said we should just offer free college to inmates, and we're supporting that initiative as Working Families. And I think finding those things, right, because it's beyond just the targeting just the issue of educational debt, but finding the ways that it seeps into other issues like incarceration, like low-wage jobs, and making sure that we're being able to fight those fights as well and paying our attention.
Yeah, and as someone who taught in a low-income school in South Texas, where a lot of my students were wanting to go to college, I just think back to what Senator Warren was saying before, that the students are doing the right thing. We keep telling them to go to school, and they're going to school, but they're being saddled with debt, or they're getting targeted, especially low-income and in communities of color, they're getting targeted by for-profit colleges, where their student debt is even higher than what we're talking about at public institutions. And so these are some of the issues that we're trying to look at and address in the Higher Ed Not Debt campaign, because it's true. Like just exactly what Sarah was saying is that low-income and communities of color have higher rates of debt. They're getting targeted by these bad actors, and we need to make sure that we're supporting them as, like the senator said, these young people are making the right decisions. People are making the right decisions to go to school, to get educated. So we are pretty much out of time, but like I said, I used to teach, so I'm going to do a little teacher homework for all of you all. So one, please go to higherednotdebt.org and check out the website. If you have student debt, we have a survey on there that we'd love for you to figure out, because we're trying to get a better handle as well as what does this look like for people's day-to-day lives? What did you know going into college? When you're going to college and you're taking these loans out, did you have any idea that you'd be paying $400 a month afterwards? So please fill out the survey. So that's homework number one. Number two, like Sarah Ann mentioned, there is a Twitter town hall that is starting at 11 o'clock with Tamara. So if you have more questions, tweet at Tamara, and it's going to be going on until 6 o'clock. We have people like Congressman Pocan participating, Senator Gillibrand, so it should be really great. And then finally, there's amazing community solutions that are happening, but we really need our legislators to get involved. So my homework/challenge to you all is to find out what your members of Congress and or senators and state legislators and community college members and board of trustees, what are they doing to address the high rates of student debt in your community? So thank you so much for joining us today, and looking forward to engaging with you all in this campaign moving forward. Thanks.
And please take the reports that are here.